Distinguished Chief Guest, Professor Rana, distinguished, I invite you Dr. Rana, Professor Abhisubedi. I would like to start with a little caveat that my review that I'm presenting now is only based on subjects that I'm familiar with. Mainly, I'm not covering chapters 1, 2, 3, and 5. I excuse myself for this. I'm not an expert in that subject, so I'm only taking up subjects that I'm familiar with. It is most welcome that Nepalese intellectuals are coming forth with their insights, analysis, and wisdom of history and the state of the Nepal state. Hopefully, more will come forth to enlighten us with their experiences and challenges. This is the best way to develop endogenous approaches to a public policy curriculum and its teaching. I asked myself whether the title is appropriate. Is Nepal in 2008 still in transition? I know authors like Aditya Man and his colleagues, I think Nepal is still in transition. I am honored and grateful to place my views on Nepal, a country in transition, and I would like to thank Deepak Gewaliji and Dr. Dwarika Dungilji for inviting me for this occasion. Let me start with their article, Corruption, the Bane of Nepal Governance, Chapter 9. Because I believe that it is at the core corruption which has brought to an end all past regimes and the political fortunes of all political parties. As citizens will vote them out of power and throw up new political leadership. The authors say, and I quote, "The country may have strong legal and institutional frameworks, but the image of the country has been growing from bad to worse from all indications." Page 301. This is putting it tamely for us, as lessons from Romania, Ukraine, Malaysia, and now Pakistan suggest that if ensuing radical political movements in quest of a pro-war prosperity and justice will result in imprisonment of political and economic elites, whose nexus gives rise to crony capitalism in a mafia-driven economy and society where political parties will enter into gang fights, desertions, and patronage from powerful neighbors in the protection of self-interest at the cost of national interest. Where public posts are awarded to the highest bidder, and as anarchy grows in society, democracy will be weakened as citizens clamor for a strong, clean man to lead the nation and ensure justice. What disappointed me in this learned empirical study is the complete absence of the role of foreign aid and INGOs in feeding corruption in our society. Let's be clear, 11 years of remittance income in 1996 to 2004 has greater impact on reducing poverty than more than 50 years of foreign aid. Aid as a source of corruption began when aid agents would resort to sharing their commissions with politicians and top bureaucrats, and began the practice of lodging their commissions in offshore banks. The authors do not mention the case of the German Marsangli project, which was a case of aid in reverse, by implementing a project that was 5 times higher than the actual market price with a historic 50-month delay. Here was a virtual milking cow for the Germans, aid agents, contractors, bureaucrats, and NEA managers. This is covered in their book. No income taxes whatsoever are paid on the commission by the agents. Their status as legitimate agents are not even mentioned in the contract signed. They remain hidden. It is well documented that as high as 70 to 80% of all aid flows back to the donor country, and no more than 10% to the beneficiaries, with the rest being pocketed by politicians and bureaucrats. The irony is that to receive aid, we need to fund such projects to 20% of the project, presumably to meet local operational costs. Editor Madan, now move on. Editor Madan Dal's unremitting struggle for economic and survival and growth, chapter 4, left me wondering whether the united voice of prosperous Nepal, following the successful passage of the Constitution of 2015, with a stable communist government with a 2/3 majority in parliament and also 6 out of 7 provinces, would become a reality. Specifically, Nepal has committed to leave the rank of LDCs nations by 2022 and to become a middle-income country by 2030, which would require, as he mentions, the GDP to grow from around 8 to 9%. Professor Dal rightly says that this remains a daunting task, given its inability to spend its capital budget, which alone helps good capital formation, without which growth is not possible. This requires modern infrastructure, good governance, seeking transparency and accountability of all political and bureaucratic executives, effectiveness in decision-making at all policy levels by the central government and the 750 local governments, efficiency in the use and allocation of resources through recourse to a national and local market economy, where all monopolistic behavior is strictly controlled, not least of war and corruption, with a sound criminal justice system in place. Most of the basics are not in place yet, except in the intended creation of the sound infrastructure, which is not fully utilized, can create massive debt problems leading to economic instability, which will cause political instability despite the parliamentary and provincial majorities. I congratulate Dr. Dahal for his vision to build a strong national economy. However, he fails to tackle the issue of our currency union with India, which means we can hardly build a strong national economy as the foreign exchange regime compromises the need for an independent interest and inflation policies, and also export and import diversification to reduce the economic dependency on India. Now I move on to chapter 7, Raviraj Thapa and Chiranjan Thapa's National Security Challenges and Perspectives. Article was an eye-opener to me. They underscored the existential threats to Nepal coming from the external environment and myriads of external forces. Amidst the internal threats, they underscore the factor and force arising from criminalization of politics and politicization of crime, which is how a mafia economy gets born, in the virtual absence of a sound criminal justice system. When 6 out of 13 IGPs have been indicted for corruption, the so-called mafiaization of the economy and society is well underway. The matter is compounded by the fact that, and they mentioned that 4 out of 7 of the IGPs of the armed police force, founded only in 2000, have also been indicted for corruption. Add to this security scenario the link between politicians and party-protected criminal outfits. In October 2008, Maoist-led government withdrew 349 criminal cases, whereas the UML-led government withdrew in 2009 withdrew 283 criminal cases. In fact, many politicians sitting in parliament have criminal record, including in engaging in human trafficking. The other eye-opener from chapter 7 is that the constitution provided a national security agency is a misnomer to me, being more a National Defense Council comprising the Nepal Army, represented by the Chief of Staff as member, along with the Prime Minister and the Defense, Home and Finance Minister alike, and the Chief Secretary. The Secretariat is manned by, and they said, reluctant officers nominated by the security agencies. What's pitiful is that the NSC has no national security policy to guide them. It is made worse by political parties not agreed on what Nepal's core national interests are. It is clear from this chapter that Nepal's great weakness is for its leaders to have the capacity to think strategically. It is no wonder that we lack the stability to think long-term and to execute and coordinate plans. The authors do not tackle the likely impact on our national security from climate change and global warming. Had they done so, the issue arises whether comprehensive security or human security should be included in the nature and scope of this National Security Council, with all the ramifications as to its composition and membership over the role of civil society, think tanks, and independent intellectuals. The authors somewhat ignore whether and to what extent the Nepal Army should be undertaking infrastructure projects without compromising its national security duties. They have ignored the pertinent question of just how many security agencies does Nepal need and what is the optimal size of the security forces, especially given the fact that close to a battalion may be serving as household staff of current and retired personnel. Foreign policy experts Mohan Lohani and Dr. Nishchal Pandey's Foreign Policy Challenges and Opportunity Chapter 6 comprehensively treat the subject in their contributions, sticking true to the assertion that both history and geography are determinants of foreign policy. One is struck immediately by any reference to King Girendra's zone of peace concept, which was the cornerstone of our foreign policy from 1974 to 2001. 140 countries had endorsed this policy, except India because it rejected the commitment to special relations. It was reinforced by Girendra's admirable initiative to strategize foreign policy with national security and national interests clearly defined. For the first time ever in the history of foreign policy making in Nepal. This was the glory days of Nepal international relations and diplomacy, with Nepal taking the lead of the LLDC group, effective participation and due recognition by the UN Security Council for its role in UN peacekeeping, international appreciation of its voting behavior in the UN system as a truly non-aligned nation, state visits by several European leaders, and not least moving the SAARC process and founding the SAARC itself. The authors call for the review of the UK-Nepal tripartite agreement as it smacks of Nepal supplying mercenaries to the treaty partners. No alternatives are suggested. Significantly, the communists and Maoists who were the forefront opposing this treaty have now agreed to allow UK to recruit women workers. In conclusion, the authors quote me at some length on the strategic direction of our foreign policy in the 21st century, multipolar and turbulent times. Let me briefly underscore here that our foreign policy goals should be non-aligned. I believe that our foreign policy goals should be non-aligned and neutrality, with comprehensive strategic partnerships with Bangladesh, China and India, along with active partnership in the United Nations, offering to go beyond UN keeping to even UN peace enforcement, with calling for countries recruiting Nepalese nations to give citizens on recruitment. In other words, if we want to get rid of the image of a mercenary state, to insist that all countries recruiting Nepalese provide instantly citizenship to that nation. And because we also have the NRN, they can continue their links with us. Last but not the least, this book should find a place in all universities and colleges, and I said at the start, can lay the foundation for starting public policy degree courses in Nepal, which we lack severely. And also I've included some of the articles I wrote as references if it is interesting. Thank you very much.